Right now, somewhere in Florida, a dentist is signing away a practice she spent 20 years building. Now, the purchase looks incredible. The private equity buyer is charming. But buried in that stack of documents are 3 clauses that will quietly take back most of what she thinks she just earned. In this video, I will break down the 3 most dangerous clauses in a private equity sale, rollover equity, earnouts, and restrictive covenants, and then I'll show you the Florida law twist that most sellers, and honestly, most lawyers outside the state completely miss. And by the end of this video, you'll know exactly where the traps are hiding before you ever sit down at the closing table. Private equity roll-ups are sweeping through Florida right now. Dental practices, medical groups, HVAC companies, commercial services. High-growth states attract this capital, and Florida is at the top of the list. Now you're probably thinking, if they were paying me millions, what's the problem? Well, the problem is not the price. The problem is the fine print that determines whether you ever actually collect it. Now let me show you the first trap. I call the first trap the second bite illusion. And here's how the pitch goes. The buyer does not pay you 100% in cash. Instead, they ask you to roll over 20 or 30% of your sale price into equity in their new, bigger company. They call it the second bite of the apple. When they sell the whole platform in 5 years, your rolled equity supposedly pays out again, but even bigger. It sounds like a bonus. It is actually where sellers get hurt the most. Now, the reason this matters is simple. The value of rollover equity is determined entirely by the documents, not by the pitch. Now, 3 questions expose the trap. First, what class of equity are you getting? If the private equity funds hold preferred units with a liquidation preference, they get paid back first, sometimes with a guaranteed return stacked on top before your common units see a single dollar. I call that the preference stack. If the next sale underperforms, the preference stack can eat your entire second bite. The second question is, can they dilute you? If the fund can issue new units to itself in a downturn, your percentage shrinks while you watch from the sidelines with no vote. Now the third question, do you have any exit right? Now you're probably thinking, I will just sell my units if I do not like where things are going, right? But rollover equity almost always comes with transfer restrictions. So no put right, no ability to force a buyback. You are locked in until they decide to sell. And that first trap connects directly to the second one, because the same buyer who controls your equity also controls the numbers your earnout depends on. Here's trap number 2. This is called the Earnout Mirage. An earnout says part of your price gets paid later only if the business hits certain targets after closing. Revenue targets, EBITDA targets, patient count, service contracts retained. So you're probably thinking, my business is strong. Of course we'll hit the targets. And here's what you're missing. The day after closing, you no longer control the business. The buyer does, and the buyer controls the very numbers that decide whether you get paid. Now watch how this works in practice. The new owner layers a management fee on top of your practice, allocates corporate overhead against your location, delays a marketing spend, reclassifies expenses. None of it is necessarily illegal, but every one of those decisions pushes your EBITDA below the earnout target. Your money quietly evaporates on someone else's spreadsheet. Now the fix has to be drafted before you sign. You want the metrics defined with surgical precision. What counts, what is excluded, and who calculates it. You want a covenant that the buyer must operate the business consistent with the past practices and cannot take actions designed to defeat the earnout. And you want audit rights and a fast dispute mechanism so you're not litigating for 3 years to collect what you already earned. Now trap number 3, the 7-year handcuffs. Every private equity buyer will demand a non-compete, and that's normal. They're buying your goodwill and they do not want you opening across the street. But there's a massive difference between a reasonable covenant and one that ends your career entirely. Now here's the part most sellers never hear. Florida is one of the most enforcement-friendly non-compete states in America, and the rules get even tougher when you are the seller of a business. Under Florida Statute 542-335, when a covenant is tied to the sale of a business, a restriction of 3 years or less is presumed reasonable, and courts will not presume it unreasonable until it stretches past 7 years. Now compare that to an ordinary employee where anything over 2 years is presumed unreasonable. Now as a seller, you are in the category with the least protection. Buyers know this. And that is why the draft that lands on your desk says 5, 6, 7 years statewide, covering every service line you ever touched. Now you're probably thinking, can't a judge just throw out an unfair clause? Well, Florida courts generally do not throw them out. They modify them and enforce the rest. This is called blue penciling. So the negotiation table, not the courtroom, is where your future gets decided. Narrow the years, narrow the geography, narrow the definition of competition, and carve out what you actually want to do next year: teaching, consulting, passive investments. Now here's where Florida law gets even more interesting, because for dental and medical sellers, there is a statute that flips the leverage back to you, and most people have never heard of it. In Florida, a non-dentist cannot own a dental practice, period. Florida Statutes 466025 says that no one other than a licensed dentist or an entity made up of dentists may employ a dentist in the operation of a dental office, control the dental equipment during patient care, or direct or interfere with a dentist's clinical judgment. Violating it is a third-degree felony, and any contracts that crosses that line is void as against public policy. All right, so you're probably thinking, then how is private equity buying dental practices all over Florida? Well, through a structure I call the MSO Firewall, the Management Services Organization. The dentist keeps a professional entity that owns the clinical practice, and the private equity buyer owns a separate management company that provides the business side: billing, marketing, staffing, real estate, and accounting. Florida's rules expressly allow properly drafted practice management services. Now, everything turns on how that management agreement is drafted. Most sellers see the MSO as the buyer's tool. It is actually your leverage. Because you must remain the legal owner of the clinical entity, a well-drafted structure can protect your authority over clinical decisions and define exactly which fees the MSO can charge, which protects your earnout math, and preserve real value in the entity you still own. A sloppy structure does the opposite. It hands de facto control to the buyer, and if it crosses the statutory line, the entire arrangement can be void, which is a catastrophe for everyone, including you, after you have rolled all your equity into this business. So the private equity offer is not the finish line. It is actually the starting gun. The second bite illusion, the earnout Mirage, and the 7-year handcuffs are all negotiable, but only before you sign, and only if you know they are there. Now, if a roll-up is knocking on your door, get a Florida attorney who lives in these details before you sign anything, even the letter of intent. Now, if you found this valuable, hit that like button, subscribe. I'm Santiago Cueto, your Florida business attorney. Be sure to watch more of my videos right here.